My name is Father Samuel, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been rooted in faith. Serving God and my community as a priest has been my calling, my identity, and my purpose. My faith was my anchor in every storm, the foundation of my existence. It guided my thoughts, my actions, and my life's work. I believed it was unshakable, a bedrock upon which I could always stand. But what happens when the ground you thought was solid begins to crack beneath your feet? What happens when the very thing that defines you starts to slip away, leaving you grasping for answers? This is the story of how I lost my way, and how I found it again in the most unexpected and miraculous of ways. I grew up in a small, close-knit town, surrounded by love and faith. My parents were devout Christians who lived their lives with quiet humility, always putting others before themselves. Our home was filled with warmth, kindness, and an unspoken understanding that God was at the center of everything. From a young age, I was drawn to the stories of Scripture, captivated by the teachings of Jesus and the idea of a love so pure and unconditional that it could redeem even the most broken of souls. It wasn't just a part of my upbringing, it was something that resonated deep within me, something that felt like truth. By the time I was a teenager, I knew in my heart that my life was meant to be devoted to serving Him. No other path made sense to me. I wanted to dedicate every fiber of my being to spreading His love and guiding others towards salvation. When I felt the call to the priesthood, it was like a fire igniting in my soul. I enrolled in seminary, immersing myself in theology, Scripture, and the rich traditions of the Church. Those years were some of the most formative of my life. I felt a profound sense of purpose, as though every step I took was guided by a divine hand. The more I studied, the more I felt connected to something far greater than myself. When I was finally ordained as a priest, I stood before the congregation with tears in my eyes, ready to embrace the life I had been preparing for. This was my calling, my destiny, and I was determined to honor it with every ounce of my strength and devotion. For years, I lived what I believed to be a fulfilling and meaningful life. My days were filled with prayer, masses, and the quiet, constant work of shepherding my flock. I counseled the weary, comforted the grieving, and celebrated the joyous milestones of life with those in my parish. I tried to embody the role of a good shepherd, guiding my congregation on their journey toward God. I believed I was making a difference, that I was living out my calling as faithfully as I could. But over time, something began to shift. It wasn't sudden or dramatic, it was more like a shadow creeping in at the edges of my soul. And no matter how hard I prayed, I couldn't push it away. In the last few years, I started to feel a strange emptiness. It was as though the vibrant faith that had once burned so brightly within me had dimmed to a flicker. I began to question myself, questioning if I was truly doing enough, if my prayers were genuine, or if they had become nothing more than hollow words spoken out of habit. There was a gnawing sense that something was missing, that despite all my efforts, I was falling short. I couldn't understand why I felt this way. I was following the rules, upholding the traditions, and fulfilling my duties. But the more I tried to convince myself that I was on the right path, the more I felt the weight of doubt pressing down on me. It became clear to me that my faith had turned into a routine, a series of rituals that I performed without the deep, personal connection I once had. My prayers felt mechanical, my sermons lacked the passion they once held, and my heart felt distant from the God I had devoted my life to. I was terrified. How could I, a priest, feel so disconnected from the very foundation of my existence? Was this a test? A punishment? Or was it something even worse, a sign that I had lost my way entirely? I began to fear that I would never truly feel God's presence again, that I had somehow failed Him in ways I couldn't even comprehend. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the feeling of disconnection only grew stronger. It was as though I was drifting further and further away from something vital, something sacred. I felt like a ship lost at sea, with no compass to guide me back to shore. And yet, despite my growing despair, I couldn't bring myself to give up. I clung to the hope that I could find my way back, that God's love was still there, waiting for me, even if I couldn't feel it. But the more I searched, the more elusive it seemed. Then, something strange began to happen. I started experiencing visions, brief, fleeting images that would flash before my eyes without warning. At first, they seemed random, almost dreamlike in their nature. A field bathed in golden light. A roaring waterfall. A pair of hands reaching out toward me. They didn't make sense, and I couldn't explain where they were coming from. But they left me feeling unsettled, as though they were trying to tell me something I couldn't quite grasp. Around the same time, I began to experience physical symptoms, persistent headaches, a sense of weakness that no amount of rest could cure. I knew something was wrong, but I convinced myself that it was just fatigue, the result of pushing myself too hard. So I kept going, refusing to slow down. The visions became more frequent, more vivid. Sometimes they were beautiful, filled with light and warmth. Other times, they were dark and foreboding, like a storm brewing on the horizon. I felt like a man caught between two worlds, unable to fully understand either. The headaches grew worse, and my body felt like it was betraying me. I tried to maintain my routine, to keep up appearances, but inside, I was unraveling. It felt like a dark cloud was descending upon me, and I was powerless to stop it. I grew desperate for answers, for some kind of clarity. And yet, I couldn't shake the fear that I was losing myself entirely. In a last-ditch effort to find peace, I decided to go on a pilgrimage. I hoped that stepping away from the familiar, from the routines that had become so suffocating, might help me reconnect with God. I chose a remote mountain trail, a place where I could be alone with my thoughts and my prayers. I packed only the essentials and set out with a heavy heart, unsure of what I was looking for but determined to find it. The journey was physically demanding, but I welcomed the challenge. With each step, I prayed for guidance, for a sign that I was not alone in my struggles. It was on that trail, far from civilization, that everything changed. One moment, I was hiking along a narrow path, the sun shining down through the trees. The next, a landslide came out of nowhere. I heard the rumble of rocks and earth before I saw it, and then there was no time to react. I remember screaming as I was swept away, a cascade of debris carrying me down the mountainside. The world became a blur of chaos and noise, and then, silence. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in my body. I was floating above the scene, watching as if from a distance. There I was, lying motionless among the rubble, and yet I felt no fear, no pain. Only a strange, profound sense of calm. It was surreal, watching myself from above. My earthly form looked so small, so fragile, and yet I felt an overwhelming peace that I couldn't explain. I realized that I was no longer bound by the physical world, that I was free in a way I had never known. And then, I felt it, a pull, a gentle but undeniable force drawing me forward. It wasn't frightening, it was comforting, like being called home after a long journey. I let myself be carried by it, surrendering to the pull without hesitation. It was then that I saw the light. A radiant, warm light that seemed to encompass everything, love, peace, and eternity. It was calling to me, and I was powerless to resist. I moved toward the light, feeling its warmth envelop me like a long-lost embrace. It wasn't just an illumination, it was alive, pulsating with love and acceptance beyond anything I had ever known. Every step closer dissolved the lingering doubts and fears that had haunted me for years. There was no need for explanation, no need for words. The light was everything I had searched for my entire life, and yet it was so much more than I could have ever imagined. It was as though every piece of my fragmented soul was being put back together, made whole in its presence. As I moved, I found myself in a tunnel of light, a passage that seemed to stretch infinitely yet felt impossibly brief. Time had no meaning here. I was being carried forward, not by my own will, but by a force that felt both gentle and unstoppable. Along the way, I could feel my burdens lifting. The weight of guilt, fear, and exhaustion that I had carried for so long was stripped away, layer by layer. I was being cleansed, purified in a way that words fail to describe. It was as if my spirit was being prepared for something extraordinary, something beyond comprehension. Finally, I reached the source of the light, and what I saw left me breathless. Standing before me, radiant and magnificent, was Jesus Christ. He wasn't as I had pictured him in paintings or sculptures. He was far more real, more alive, and more beautiful than human imagination could ever capture. His presence was overwhelming, not because it was intimidating, but because it was so full of love. It was a love that didn't just surround me, it filled me, consumed me, and healed me. I fell to my knees, not out of fear, but out of an instinctive reverence for the one who stood before me. Jesus didn't speak in words, yet I understood him perfectly. His communication was deeper than language. It was a connection that went straight to the core of my being. He knew me completely, not just a priest, not just a servant of God, but the man. He saw every corner of my soul, every doubt I had hidden, every failure I had tried to forget. And yet, there was no judgment in his gaze. Only love. Pure, boundless love that accepted me exactly as I was. It was unlike anything I had ever felt, and in that moment, I understood what it truly meant to be known and loved. "You have sought me in ritual and tradition," Jesus said to me, his voice resonating not in my ears, but in my heart. "But I am found in love and grace. Let go of your burdens, and let my love guide you." His words pierced through me like a light breaking through the darkest storm. I realized how much of my life I had spent striving, trying to earn God's favor through acts of devotion and adherence to rules, when all he wanted was my heart. All he had ever wanted was for me to embrace his love and let it transform me. Jesus continued, "I have shown you this near-death experience so that you may know the truth. Life is precious, and salvation is not earned, but freely given through me." I felt tears streaming down my face as he spoke, not from sadness, but from the sheer magnitude of what I was experiencing. He showed me his life, his teachings, his miracles, and his ultimate sacrifice on the cross. It was as if I was living those moments alongside him, feeling the depth of his love for humanity. "I took all your sins," he said, "and you no longer have to strive to earn God's favor. I love you unconditionally." In that moment, the weight I had carried for years, the fear of not being enough, the doubt that I had failed him, vanished. I saw my faith in a new light, not as a set of rules and obligations, but as a relationship. Jesus showed me that my faith was never meant to be a checklist of rituals. It was meant to be an open, living connection with him. "You've made your life about doing," he said, "but I just want you to be. Be with me. Be happy. Be free." Heaven unfolded before my eyes, a place of indescribable beauty and joy. It wasn't the golden streets or pearly gates I had imagined. It was the overwhelming presence of love, a love so complete that it left no room for pain or sorrow. This, Jesus told me, was the promise for all who chose him. "It is a gift," he said, "not a reward. A gift for those who open their hearts to my love." Then, just as suddenly, he showed me the opposite, a void, a place devoid of light, love, and hope. It wasn't fire and brimstone, it was emptiness, a chilling absence that left me shaken. "This is what happens when people turn away from me," he said. "You must warn them. You have been chosen to share what you have seen." His words struck a chord deep within me. I had always thought of my faith as a personal journey, but now I realized it was so much more. I had been given this experience not just for my own sake, but for the sake of others. Jesus said, "My path is not about rules and restrictions, it's about love, and it's about freedom. Choose to believe, and you will be free from all fears and doubts." His love, he explained, was not a prize to be earned, but a gift given freely to all. "You are precious to me," he said, "as is every single soul. Go and share this truth." As the light around me began to shift, Jesus made one final promise: "You will never be alone. I am always with you." His words filled me with a peace I had never known, a peace that surpassed all understanding. I wanted to stay in his presence forever, but I knew he was sending me back for a purpose. "Your life will become a testimony to my love," he said. "You have been chosen to help others find the grace that has saved you. Trust in me, and you will have the strength to fulfill your calling." And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, I found myself back in my body. Pain and exhaustion hit me like a tidal wave, but they were overshadowed by a deep sense of peace and purpose. I opened my eyes to find myself in a hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses. Their faces were a mixture of relief and astonishment, as though they couldn't believe I was alive. I couldn't believe it either. But I knew, without a doubt, that my time on earth wasn't finished. I had been given a second chance, not just to live, but to serve. In the days and weeks that followed, I began to share my experience with anyone who would listen. I spoke of Jesus' love, His grace, and the gift of salvation that is freely available to all. Some people were skeptical, others were moved to tears, but I didn't let their reactions deter me. I wasn't doing this for approval, I was doing it for Him. My life had been transformed, and I knew my purpose was to help others experience that same transformation. I became a messenger of His love, not through obligation, but through an overwhelming desire to share the truth that had saved me. Now, as I look back, I see how every step of my journey led me to this moment. The doubts, the struggles, the near-death experience, they were all part of a greater plan. My faith is no longer a routine or a set of rituals, it is a living, breathing relationship with the one who loves me unconditionally. And it is a relationship I am called to share with the world. If you take nothing else from my story, let it be this: His love is for everyone. It's not something you earn, it's something you accept. And once you do, it will change everything. From the moment I returned, my life took on a clarity and purpose I had never known before. The aches and pains of my earthly body, the scars left by the landslide, and the exhaustion of recovery seemed trivial compared to the mission I now carried in my heart. I was no longer the same man who had wandered into the wilderness in search of answers. I had been given a glimpse of eternity, and I couldn't remain silent about what I had seen. The first thing I did upon leaving the hospital was return to my parish. I stood before the congregation on a bright Sunday morning, the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows, and I spoke from a place of vulnerability and truth. I told them about my pilgrimage, the accident, and the near-death experience that had brought me face to face with Jesus Christ. I shared the words He had spoken to me, how He had reminded me that salvation was not something to be earned, but a gift freely given. I told them of His love, how it wasn't confined to rituals or traditions, but was alive, limitless, and always reaching out to us. Some in the crowd wept openly, others sat in stunned silence. I could see the doubt in a few eyes, the hesitation to believe such an extraordinary tale. But I also saw hope, the kind of hope that only comes when someone dares to believe that they, too, are loved unconditionally. After the service, a young woman approached me, tears streaming down her face. "Father Samuel," she said, her voice trembling, "I've felt unworthy my entire life. But hearing your story, hearing how Jesus spoke about love and grace, I feel like maybe I can believe it for myself." Her words struck a chord in me. This was why I had been sent back, to reach people like her, people who were searching for something they couldn't quite name, people who felt lost or unworthy. It wasn't about convincing skeptics or defending theology. It was about sharing the truth of Jesus' love in a way that could touch hearts and change lives. Over time, I began to speak not just within my parish, but in other churches, community centers, and even outdoor gatherings. The message was always the same: Jesus' love is for everyone. It doesn't matter who you are, where you've been, or what you've done. His arms are always open, and His grace is always enough. I spoke of my near-death experience not as a story to entertain or inspire awe, but as a testimony to the truth I had encountered. People came to hear me from all walks of life: believers, skeptics, the curious, and the desperate. Some came seeking answers, others came seeking hope. And time again, I saw how the simple message of love and grace could break through even the hardest of hearts. But not everyone welcomed my message. Some of my colleagues in the clergy were skeptical, questioning the validity of my experience or accusing me of sensationalism. "Why would God choose you for such a revelation?" one priest asked me pointedly. "What makes your story any different from the countless others who claim to have seen visions or heard voices?" His words stung, but I didn't let them shake me. I wasn't sharing my story to gain approval or recognition. I was sharing it because it was the truth, and because I knew it had the power to change lives. I found solace in a community of fellow believers who understood the transformative power of grace. They became my new family, my new flock, and together we supported one another in our journeys of faith. It was in their company that I began to understand the true nature of the priesthood. It wasn't about standing on a pedestal or acting as a gatekeeper to God's love. It was about walking alongside others, sharing in their joys and sorrows, and pointing them to the one who could heal their wounds and fill their hearts. One evening, as I sat in quiet reflection, I thought back to the moment when Jesus had spoken to me. "You will never be alone," he had said, and those words had carried me through every challenge since my return. Even in moments of doubt or difficulty, I felt his presence, guiding me, strengthening me, and reminding me of the promise he had made. My life was no longer my own, it was his. And that realization brought me a joy and freedom I had never known before. I began to see the fruits of my new calling in the lives of those around me. A man who had been estranged from his family for years reconciled with his children after hearing my testimony. A woman who had been battling addiction found the courage to seek help and embrace the love she had once believed was out of reach. A teenager who had been on the brink of despair found hope and purpose in the truth of Jesus' grace. These were not my victories, they were his. I was merely the vessel, the messenger, the one who had been given the privilege of sharing his love with the world. But there were also challenges. Not everyone was ready to hear the message, and some rejected it outright. I encountered hostility, skepticism, and even ridicule. There were moments when I felt discouraged, moments when I wondered if I was truly making a difference. But then I would remember the light, the warmth, and the voice of Jesus telling me, "You are never alone." Those words became my anchor, my reminder that this work was not mine to carry alone. He was with me, every step of the way. As the years passed, my understanding of faith continued to evolve. I no longer saw it as a set of doctrines to be memorized or rules to be followed. Faith, I realized, was about relationship, an ongoing, intimate connection with the one who had created me, redeemed me, and called me by name. It was about trust, surrender, and the willingness to let go of control and let him lead. And it was about love, love that was not earned, but freely given, love that had the power to heal, transform, and redeem even the most broken of lives. Now, as I sit here reflecting on everything that has happened, I am overwhelmed with gratitude. My near-death experience was not just a moment of transformation for me, it was the beginning of a journey that continues to this day. I wake up each morning with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that my life is not my own but his. I don't have all the answers, and I still have moments of doubt and struggle. But I know that I am loved, and that knowledge sustains me. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, it is this: you are loved, too. You don't have to earn it, prove it, or strive for it. It is already yours, waiting for you to accept it. Jesus' love is for everyone, no matter who you are or where you've been. It is a gift, freely given, and it has the power to change everything. My prayer is that you will open your heart to that love, just as I did, and let it transform your life in ways you can't even begin to imagine. This is not the end of my story, it is only the beginning. Every day is a new opportunity to share his love, to reach out to those who are hurting, and to remind the world that salvation is not about what we do, but about what he has already done. I don't know where this journey will lead me, but I trust the one who is guiding me. And I know that, no matter what, I am never alone. Neither are you. Every day since that moment has been a step forward in faith, a journey filled with both challenges and blessings. I've come to understand that sharing the love of Jesus is not confined to sermons or formal settings. It's in the small, quiet moments of connection with people, the moments where a kind word, a listening ear, or a simple act of compassion can reflect the immense love he has for us all. I've learned that love is not just a message to be preached, it's a life to be lived, a truth to be embodied. As I continued to share my story, I began to notice something incredible. People who had been weighed down by guilt, shame, or despair were finding hope again. They weren't just hearing my words, they were feeling the truth of them in their own lives. It was as if the light I had seen during my near-death experience was now shining through me, touching the hearts of those who needed it most. And it wasn't just believers who were affected. Those who had long been skeptical or indifferent to matters of faith were beginning to ask questions, to seek something deeper. I realized then that my experience was not just for me, it was a gift meant to be shared with the world. Not long ago, I was invited to speak at a conference for clergy and lay leaders. It was a gathering of people from various denominations, all united by a desire to serve their communities and spread the message of God's love. As I stood before the crowd, I felt a familiar wave of humility and awe. I wasn't there because I was special or extraordinary. I was there because God had chosen to use me, flaws and all, to share His truth. I began my talk by recounting my near-death experience, describing the light, the presence of Jesus, and the words He had spoken to me. I could see the expressions on the faces of those in the audience. Some were moved, some were skeptical, but all were listening intently. As I spoke, I felt the Spirit moving through me, guiding my words and filling the room with a sense of peace. I shared what Jesus had taught me about love, grace, and the freedom that comes from surrendering to Him. I spoke of the importance of relationship over ritual, of embracing the gift of salvation rather than trying to earn it. And I reminded them, as I remind everyone I meet, that His love is for all, for the broken, the weary, the doubting, and the lost. By the time I finished, the room was filled with a profound silence, the kind that can only come when hearts are truly being touched. Afterward, a young pastor approached me. He looked nervous, as though he wasn't sure how to put his thoughts into words. Finally, he said, "Father Samuel, I've been struggling with my faith for years. I've been going through the motions, doing what's expected of me, but I've felt so empty. Hearing your story, it's like something inside me has woken up. Thank you for reminding me of why I started this journey in the first place." His words brought tears to my eyes because I understood exactly how he felt. I had been there, lost in the routine, disconnected from the very source of my calling. To see him rediscover his passion for God was a reminder of why I continue to share my story, even when it's difficult. But not every encounter has been as uplifting. There have been times when my message has been met with skepticism, even hostility. Some have accused me of fabricating my experience, calling it a hallucination or a psychological phenomenon. Others have dismissed it as wishful thinking, a desperate attempt to make sense of a traumatic event. At first, these reactions hurt. I wanted so badly for everyone to understand, to see the truth of what I had experienced. But over time, I realized that my job is not to convince or argue. My job is simply to share what I know to be true and to trust that God will work in the hearts of those who hear it. One particularly challenging moment came when I was invited to speak at a university. The audience was a mix of students, professors, and members of the community, many of whom were skeptical of religion. I knew going in that I would be facing tough questions, and I prayed for the wisdom to respond with grace. After sharing my story, a student stood up and asked, "How do you know it was real? How do you know it wasn't just your brain playing tricks on you during a near-death experience?" His question was valid, and I took a moment to gather my thoughts before answering. "I can't prove to you that what I experienced was real in a scientific sense," I said. "But what I can tell you is this: the love I felt in that moment was more real than anything I've ever known. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a truth that changed me from the inside out. And the proof of that truth is in the way my life has been transformed. The peace, the joy, the purpose I now have, they're not things I could have manufactured on my own. They're gifts from the one who met me in that light and sent me back to share his love with others. You don't have to take my word for it. But I hope you'll keep your heart open to the possibility that there is more to this life than what we can see or measure." The student nodded thoughtfully, and though I don't know if my words changed his mind, I do know that a seed was planted. And that's all I can ever hope to do, to plant seeds of hope, love, and faith, trusting that God will make them grow in His own time. As I continue on this journey, I find myself constantly amazed by the ways God works through ordinary people like me. I've seen lives transformed, relationships restored, and hearts healed. I've seen people who were on the brink of despair find hope in the message of Jesus' love. And I've seen how even the smallest acts of kindness can make a profound difference. Through it all, I am reminded that this is not my work, it is His. I am merely a vessel, a messenger, a servant of the one who has called me by name. Looking back, I can see how every moment of my life, even the painful and confusing ones, has been part of a greater plan. The doubts, the struggles, the near-death experience, they were all necessary to bring me to this place of understanding and purpose. And while I don't know what the future holds, I trust the one who holds it. I know that He is with me, just as He promised, and that His love will continue to guide me every step of the way. So, if you're reading this and you find yourself searching for meaning, for hope, for something to hold on to, know this: you are not alone. You are loved, more deeply and completely than you can imagine. And that love is not something you have to earn or deserve. It is a gift, freely given, waiting for you to accept it. My prayer is that you will open your heart to that love, just as I did, and let it transform your life in ways you can't even begin to imagine. Because once you experience it, you'll never be the same again. As the years went on, I grew more aware of how my journey was not just about my personal transformation, but about being a living testimony of the grace I had encountered. Every interaction, every story shared, every hand held in prayer became an opportunity to reflect the love of Jesus that had saved me. My days were no longer driven by the rigid structure of rituals, but by a sense of openness to where God would lead me next. I had come to understand that faith was not static, it was alive, dynamic, and constantly deepening as I walked closer to Him. One day, I received a letter from a man I had never met. He wrote that he had heard my story through a recording of one of my talks, and it had moved something within him. He confessed that he had been living a life far from faith, immersed in materialism and self-doubt, but something about my words had made him reconsider. For the first time in years, I feel like maybe there's hope for me, he wrote. Maybe I'm not as lost as I thought. I sat with that letter for a long time, tears filling my eyes. To know that my story had touched even one person in such a profound way was a humbling reminder of the responsibility I had been given. I decided to meet this man, and we spent an afternoon talking about life, faith, and the struggles that had brought him to the place he was in now. As he shared his story, I saw echoes of my own journey, his doubts, his fears, his longing for something more. I didn't have all the answers for him, but I didn't need to. Sometimes, being present, listening, and pointing someone toward Jesus is enough. By the end of our conversation, he told me he wanted to open his heart to God. We prayed together, and in that moment, I could feel the presence of the Holy Spirit, a quiet yet powerful assurance that this man's life was about to change. Stories like his became more frequent as I continued to share my testimony. People from all walks of life, young and old, believers and skeptics, would reach out to me, seeking guidance or simply wanting to know more about the love I had spoken of. Each encounter reminded me of the words Jesus had spoken during my near-death experience: "You will touch the lives of others and lead them to my love." I realized that this was not a burden but a privilege, a sacred calling to be a vessel of His grace. Of course, there were moments of difficulty, times when I questioned whether I was truly making an impact or if I was simply repeating the same message over and over. There were days when the weight of others' pain and struggles felt overwhelming, when I wondered if I was strong enough to carry out this mission. But in those moments, I would return to prayer, seeking the strength and guidance of the one who had called me. And without fail, I would feel His reassurance, His gentle reminder that I was not alone. "My strength is made perfect in your weakness," He would whisper to my heart, and those words would carry me through. One of the most profound moments of my journey came when I was invited to speak at a prison. It was a place filled with men who had been written off by society, many of whom believed they were beyond redemption. As I stood before them, I felt a deep compassion for their pain, their regrets, and the burdens they carried. I shared my story with them, not as a man who had all the answers, but as someone who had also felt lost and unworthy. I told them about the love of Jesus, a love that was not dependent on their past, but on their willingness to open their hearts. At the end of my talk, one of the inmates approached me. He was a large man with a hardened expression, but there was a vulnerability in his eyes that caught me off guard. "Do you really believe He could forgive someone like me?" he asked, his voice trembling. I looked him in the eye and said, "I don't just believe it, I know it. His love is for everyone, including you." In that moment, the walls he had built around his heart began to crumble. We prayed together, and as he wept, I saw a glimpse of the man God had created him to be. It was a reminder that no one is beyond the reach of His grace. Over time, my ministry expanded to places I never could have imagined. I began writing about my experiences, publishing essays and reflections that reached people far beyond the walls of any church. I was invited to speak on radio programs, podcasts, and even television, sharing the message of love and grace with audiences I might never have encountered otherwise. At first, the attention felt overwhelming. I worried that the focus was shifting away from God and onto me. But I reminded myself that this was not about fame or recognition. It was about using every platform available to point people toward Him. Through it all, I remained deeply connected to my parish and the community that had supported me from the beginning. They were my anchor, the ones who reminded me of the beauty of everyday faithfulness. I continued to celebrate Mass, visit the sick, and counsel those in need. These moments of quiet service were just as meaningful as the larger opportunities to share my story. They kept me grounded, reminding me that the love of Jesus is present not just in extraordinary experiences, but in the simple, ordinary acts of kindness that weave through our lives. As I reflect on this journey, I am filled with gratitude, not just for the miraculous encounter that changed my life, but for every person I have had the privilege of walking alongside since then. Each story, each conversation, each life touched by His love is a testament to the truth that salvation is not something we achieve, but something we receive. It is a gift, freely given, and it transforms not just individuals, but entire communities. If you are reading this, I want you to know that this message is for you, too. No matter where you are in life, no matter what you have done or how far you feel from God, His love is waiting for you. It is not a love that demands perfection or performance. It is a love that meets you exactly where you are and invites you to step into the fullness of who you were created to be. All you have to do is say yes. Open your heart and let His love in. It will change everything. It changed me, and I know it can change you, too. My story is far from over, and neither is yours. Every day is a new chapter, a new opportunity to walk in faith and share the love that has been so freely given to us. I don't know what lies ahead, but I trust the one who holds my future. And I know that, no matter what, I am never alone. Neither are you. As the years unfolded, I found myself in awe of the ways God continued to work through my life. My journey with Him became a living testimony, not just of transformation, but of the power of surrender. And yet, even as I saw the ripple effects of His grace in the lives of so many, I understood that my role was not to be the hero of this story. The hero was, and always would be, Jesus. I was simply the voice, the hands, the feet sent out to carry His message of love. One evening, I was invited to visit a hospice center. It was a quiet, solemn place where the air felt thick with both sorrow and unspoken hope. I had been asked to speak with a woman named Helen, who was in the final stages of her battle with cancer. Her daughter, a member of my parish, had reached out to me, saying Helen had become bitter and withdrawn, unwilling to entertain the idea of faith. She was a lifelong skeptic, someone who had turned away from God years ago after losing her husband in a tragic accident. She doesn't believe anymore, her daughter had said. But I think, deep down, she wants to. When I entered Helen's room, I found her sitting by the window, staring out at the setting sun. Her frame was frail, her face lined with years of pain. Yet there was a spark in her eyes, a glimmer of curiosity that she couldn't quite hide. I introduced myself gently, sitting beside her without forcing conversation. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "You're the priest who claims to have seen Jesus," she said, her voice tinged with both disbelief and longing. "Yes," I replied simply. "And that experience changed my life. But I'm not here to convince you of anything. I just want to listen." Helen turned her gaze back to the horizon, and for a moment, I thought she might dismiss me. But then she began to talk, slowly at first, then with a torrent of emotion. She spoke of her anger, her grief, her sense of betrayal by a God she once believed in. She spoke of the questions that had haunted her for years. Why had her husband been taken from her? Why had she been left to raise their children alone? Why had her body now betrayed her with this cruel illness? If there's a God, she said bitterly, he's done nothing but watch me suffer. Her words cut deep, not because they were directed at me, but because I could feel the weight of her pain. I didn't try to argue or defend God. Instead, I shared my story, the doubts I had carried, the emptiness I had felt, and the moment when Jesus had met me in my brokenness. I told her about his love, a love that wasn't about fixing every problem or answering every question, but about being present in the midst of it all. I don't have answers for why you've suffered, I admitted. But I know this, he hasn't abandoned you. He's been with you through it all, even when you couldn't see it. Helen didn't respond right away, but I could see the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. Over the next few days, I visited her regularly, sharing stories of hope and listening to her fears. Slowly, a shift began to take place. She started asking questions, not combative ones, but genuine ones. She wanted to know more about the Jesus I had encountered, the one who had changed everything for me. And one evening, as we sat together by the light of a single candle, she asked me to pray with her. I don't know if I believe yet, she said, her voice trembling. But I want to try. In that moment, I saw the power of grace at work. It wasn't about dramatic conversions or sudden revelations. It was about a heart opening, even just a crack, to the possibility of love. Helen's journey didn't end that night, but it began. And when she passed away a few weeks later, her daughter told me that Helen had found peace in her final days, a peace she hadn't known in years. I knew it wasn't because of me. It was because of him. Stories like Helen's became a part of my ministry, each one a testament to the quiet, persistent work of God's love. I didn't always see the results of my efforts, and that was okay. I had come to understand that my role was to plant seeds, trusting that he would make them grow in his time. Whether it was in a hospice room, a prison cell, or a crowded auditorium, the message remained the same: you are loved. You are not alone. And there is nothing that can separate you from his grace. But even as I poured myself into this work, I was reminded time and again of my own humanity. There were days when I felt tired, overwhelmed, even inadequate. There were moments when I questioned whether I was truly living up to the calling I had been given. And in those moments, I would return to the memory of the light, the warmth, the voice of Jesus telling me, you are never alone. It was a truth that sustained me, a reminder that my strength didn't come from within but from him. One particularly difficult season came when I faced health challenges of my own. The injuries I had sustained during the landslide began to take their toll, leaving me with chronic pain and physical limitations. At first, I struggled to accept this new reality. I had always been active, constantly on the move, and now I found myself forced to slow down. It felt like a setback, a hindrance to the work I was so passionate about. But in the stillness, I discovered something profound. God wasn't asking me to do more, he was asking me to trust him more. To lean into his strength, his timing, his plan. During this time, I began to focus more on writing, putting my thoughts and experiences into words that could reach people even when I couldn't be physically present. It was a new kind of ministry, one that required patience and vulnerability. But I came to see it as another way to fulfill the mission Jesus had given me. Through essays, letters, and eventually a book, I was able to share the message of his love with people I might never meet in person. And the responses I received, stories of lives touched, faith rekindled, hope restored, were a constant reminder that his work was far from finished. Now, as I sit here reflecting on all that has happened, I am filled with a sense of wonder. My life is not what I imagined it would be when I first became a priest. It is richer, deeper, and more beautiful than I could have ever planned. I have seen the heights of joy and the depths of sorrow, and through it all, I have known the steady, unshakable presence of his love. I don't know what the future holds, but I know who holds it. And I know that, no matter what, I am never alone. Neither are you. So I leave you with this: let love be the compass of your life. Let grace be the foundation upon which you stand. And let faith lead you into the unknown, trusting that He will guide you every step of the way. Because in the end, it's not about how much we accomplish or how perfectly we live. It's about how deeply we love, how fully we surrender, and how faithfully we trust the one who has loved us from the beginning. That is the heart of my story. And it can be the heart of yours, too. As I sat across from Anna, I could see the weight of her grief etched into every line of her face. Losing her family had broken something within her, and though she had come to me seeking answers, I could tell she wasn't sure she'd find any. I didn't rush to speak. I wanted to honor the depth of her pain. After all, some wounds can't be soothed by mere words. When she finished telling her story, there was a heavy silence between us, and I prayed silently, asking God to guide my words. Anna, I said softly, I can't pretend to have answers for why you've endured such loss. I wish I could take away your pain, but I can't. What I can tell you, though, is about the one who sat with me in my own darkness, the one who didn't take the pain away but gave me the strength to walk through it. She looked at me with tired eyes, her expression skeptical but not entirely closed off. I don't know how to believe that, she admitted. If God is real, why would He let this happen? It was the question I had heard so many times before, and each time it struck me differently. I didn't have a neat, tidy answer to offer her, but I knew I could share the truth that had carried me through my own struggles. Anna, I said, leaning forward slightly, there are things in this life we may never fully understand. But I've come to believe that God's love is not about shielding us from pain, it's about walking with us through it. When I was at my lowest, when I thought my life was over, He reminded me that I was not alone. And I believe He wants you to know the same. She didn't respond right away, but her gaze softened, and I could see the beginnings of something, perhaps not faith yet, but curiosity, a tiny crack in the wall she had built around her heart. Over the course of our conversations in the weeks that followed, I saw that crack widen. Anna began asking more questions, not all of them easy ones, but all of them honest. And as I shared the love of Christ with her, not in theological debates, but in simple truths, I could see her spirit beginning to heal, piece by fragile piece. One day, as we sat in the quiet of my office, she asked, "Do you think I'll ever feel whole again?" I smiled gently. I believe that wholeness doesn't mean everything is perfect or that the pain disappears. It means finding peace in the midst of it all. And that peace comes from knowing you are deeply loved, just as you are, brokenness and all. That day, Anna prayed for the first time in years. It wasn't a long or elaborate prayer, but it was real. She asked God to help her, to show her that He was there. And though she told me afterward that she didn't feel anything dramatic, I could see a lightness in her that hadn't been there before. It was the first step, and I trusted that God would continue the work He had begun in her. Anna's journey reminded me of something I had learned over and over again. Faith is not a single moment of revelation. It's a process, a journey of opening ourselves to the possibility of love, even when it feels out of reach. And sometimes, all it takes is a small act of trust, a whispered prayer, a willingness to hope, for God to begin transforming a life. As time went on, Anna became a regular presence in the parish. She started attending services and volunteering for community outreach programs. One day, she shared with the congregation her own story of loss and the slow, painful process of finding hope again. Her words touched many hearts, including mine. Watching her stand before others, sharing her testimony with such vulnerability, I was reminded of how God can bring beauty out of even the deepest pain. Her story was just one of many I encountered in my ministry, but it stayed with me because it was a testament to the quiet, relentless power of God's love. It wasn't about grand miracles or dramatic conversions. It was about the slow, steady work of healing, the kind of healing that only comes when we allow ourselves to be seen and held by the one who loves us most. Through Anna, and others like her, I learned that my role wasn't to fix people or provide all the answers. It was simply to be present, to listen, and to point them toward the one who could meet them in their pain. And in doing so, I found that my own faith grew deeper, my own understanding of God's love expanded. Each story, each life touched by His grace, became a reminder of why I had been sent back, to share the truth of His limitless love. Even now, as I reflect on her story alongside so many others, I am reminded of one simple yet profound truth: God's work is rarely loud or flashy. It is quiet, patient, and deeply personal, meeting each of us exactly where we are. And through that love, even the most shattered hearts can begin to heal. Years have passed since I first began sharing my story, and as I sit here reflecting on all that has unfolded, I am filled with a profound sense of gratitude. The journey has not been without its challenges, but I see now that every hardship, every moment of doubt, and every person I've encountered has been a part of a greater story, one that is far bigger than myself. The most humbling realization of all is that my near-death experience was never just about me. It wasn't meant to be a singular moment of revelation, but the starting point of a life lived in service to the one who saved me. Jesus didn't send me back to live for myself. He sent me back to be a witness to his love and to help others find their way to him. That mission, I now understand, is not something that ends. It's something that continues to grow and unfold with every passing day. One of the final pieces of this journey came when I returned to the mountains where the landslide had nearly claimed my life. It was a trip I had avoided for years, unsure if I was ready to face the place where everything had changed. But something within me urged me to go back, not out of fear or obligation, but as a way of honoring that pivotal moment in my life. Standing there, amidst the towering peaks and the stillness of nature, I felt a wave of emotions: gratitude, awe, and even a lingering trace of sorrow. I knelt on the ground and whispered a prayer of thanks, not just for my survival, but for the countless lives that had been touched because of that moment. I thanked God for the second chance he had given me and for the opportunity to share his love with others. As I rose, I noticed something remarkable. The area that had once been scarred by the landslide was now teeming with new life. Trees had grown back, wildflowers bloomed in vibrant colors, and birds filled the air with their songs. It was a reminder to me of the beauty that can come from devastation, a living symbol of how God restores and renews what is broken. That image has stayed with me ever since. It reminds me that no matter how lost or shattered we may feel, there is always hope. God's love has the power to take even the most painful moments of our lives and transform them into something beautiful. It is not an instant process, nor is it easy, but it is real. And it is available to every single one of us. Now, as I continue my ministry, I carry that hope with me and share it with everyone I meet. Whether I am speaking to a crowd of hundreds or sitting with someone in the quiet of their grief, the message remains the same: you are loved. You are seen. And there is nothing, no pain, no failure, no darkness, that can separate you from the love of God. I don't know how much time I have left on this earth, but I do know this: I will spend every remaining day living out the mission Jesus gave me. I will continue to share his love, to walk with others in their struggles, and to trust that he is working through me, even when I can't see it. And when my time here is done, I know exactly where I will be, back in that light, in his presence, where all things are made new. Until that day comes, I will keep saying yes to his call, keep choosing love over fear, and keep trusting in his plan. My story is not really mine at all. It is his, written through my life, and shared so that others might come to know the truth of his grace. And as I close this chapter, I do so with a heart full of peace, knowing that the journey continues in him. So, to anyone reading this, I leave you with one final thought: no matter where you are, no matter what you've been through, his love is waiting for you. Open your heart, take that first step, and let him lead you into the fullness of life. Because in his love, you will find everything you've been searching for, and more.